So about 18 months ago, I decided I'd done with computers, I'd do something completely different and I would write a book. I mean, how hard can that be, really? I like reading. I've written some white papers and I wanted to write a fictional novel about artificial intelligence and specifically about an algorithm becoming sentient. I'm still working on that book 18 months later, so don't hold your breath, but I'm aiming to get it out in the market or published by the end of the year. So once I decided to write a book, I thought, well, heck, I could make a living out of this. It wouldn't be that difficult. And unfortunately for you other budding authors, there is no money in this. So I thought, heck, well, while I'm researching AI, what I should do is have a look at cool companies that are doing great things. And as Jen mentioned, Automio, based in Taranaki, is using AI in the legal profession. Montu in Wellington is in the insurance industry. And a company called Arcanum is doing some very cool pure play AI stuff. So I really wanted to talk to you a little bit about, and bearing in mind that in about 15 minutes I'll be competing with the Prime Minister and Dr. Bloomfield. So I'm going to kind of try and condense all of this into 15 minutes. So a little bit about what's AI. It'll be kind of a high level pass, where it's going, what will the impact be in light of the current crisis, where it's going, and what can we do. So stand by for a rocket ship. So there are three main components of AI. The first is computer vision. And so when we think about computer vision for AI, we think about driverless cars, and often that's, you know, recognizing a pram versus a shopping trolley, or an apple versus an orange if I'm picking fruit. In this instance, we're using a CCTV camera, identifying humans moving about, putting bounding boxes around those, and then measuring the distance between those and providing alerts for social distancing. So that's one of the core components. And when we think about AI, computer vision is probably the area that we kind of think about most. Many of you won't know that earlier this year, the New Zealand Police announced their first AI person, and you can find Ella in the entrance room of New Zealand Police Headquarters in Thorndon. Ella stands for Electronic Lifelike Assistant, and basically she's an avatar. You can talk to Ella. She will understand the words that you are saying. She will understand the context of those words and the meaning and move you to the right area to answer questions for you. So natural language processing can either be the spoken word or also the written word. And what AI is able to do is understand those words, place those words in context, and then combining that with computer vision, even identifying what's happening with my face and trying to determine from voice reading things like sentimentality. So by the context of the words, the volume that I'm speaking, the types of words that I'm saying, and using computer vision, I'm actually able to determine whether I'm happy, sad, or confused. We were asked to do a project with Singapore Zoo. It hasn't started yet, and they wanted to understand sentiment analysis for zoo animals, and we figured out that tigers were mostly hungry most of the time. So the other area that we think about for AI is machine learning, and typically that's just taking vast amounts of data. It could be retail sales information, it could be sales information, it could be census information, it could be a variety of large amounts of information, and what I'm trying to do is understand the data and then use that data to either predict anomalies or forecasts. And you can see a lot of this happening in the banking sector and certainly in the financial services sector, like stock exchanges. So there are those three key areas: computer vision, natural language processing, and automated machine learning. And it's really about the models. When we think about AI, we think about algorithms or programs, and they are primarily models. And so how we train an AI algorithm is it's usually with lots of data. And what we do is we build neural networks. Some of you may have heard that term. Effectively, they're gateways, yes or no. Does this look like an apple or an orange? Or does this pixel look like part of a number? Is this word right? Is it in the right context? So I'm starting to train the model. I build these neural networks that look more fine-grained at either the image or the character. And what's happening just recently is I'm building neural networks to train my model, and then I'm building separate neural networks to test those models and then learn and reconfigure itself and become more accurate. And once we've got an accurate model, we can start making predictions. Is it an apple or an orange? Should I be buying Air New Zealand stock? What is the next word going to be in the sentence? And then once I'm comfortable with the accuracy of that model, I then deploy it into production. And the important thing with AI is I'm able to retrain that. So while that model is there, it's predicting, I'm also able to take other data from other fields, retrain the model, so the model is getting continuously more and more accurate. So one of the big milestones in AI was 1997 when IBM's Deep Blue beat the world chess champion Gary Kasparov, and everybody went, "Whoa, this is it! The new generation, the new millennium is around the corner. AI is the future. This is where it's going to happen." And interestingly enough, in the sort of early 2000s, AI experts call that the AI winter, because the practicality didn't really match the promise, and it's really only been the last 5 years where we've really seen the advent of AI, especially led primarily by driverless cars, algorithms that are predicting movements in stock exchanges and currency exchanges, and also using CCTV for facial recognitions and things like that. And so about 3 years ago, McKinsey, as we saw the growth of AI, McKinsey said, look, looking around and projecting this growth, we think within, by 2030, within sort of 13 to 15 years, much of the work that is done, 30% of the work that is done around the world could be automated using automation tools. I think that this current crisis is going to be the tipping point for AI. And, just looking through, what's happening in terms of predictions of unemployment. Just last month, the UN predicted 195 million people will be unemployed as a result of the crisis. I think it'll probably be more than that, but it's certainly, hundreds of millions. And what we saw in the last recession, the global financial crisis of 2008, many of the jobs that were lost were replaced by automation. And we really saw the rise of online shopping, social media, cloud computing, platforms like Airbnb and Uber were launched then, all really based on technology and automation. And it's highly likely that many of the jobs that will be lost as a result of this crisis, as large-scale enterprises look to come out of this fast, they will be replacing those lost jobs with automation tools, primarily based on artificial intelligence. So it's pretty obvious to see that manufacturing, hospitality roles, call centers, even taxi drivers. In fact, 2020 was going to be the year of the driverless car in New Zealand. We're seeing the advent of 5G that makes that more real. Many of those roles over this year and in the coming years that have been lost as a result of this recession will be replaced by automated tools, not necessarily robots that are moving around, but organizations like call centers where I can replicate the human voice, I can understand what you're saying to me, I can scale that out automatically. Those roles will be replaced by technology. And then further down the track, AI is really going to threaten some of these other more I guess, mature roles. I'm not saying that AI is going to replace those roles, but increasingly they're going to replace, interns, junior positions with technology that can replace that. Automia building tools for lawyers to use each other data sets. Accountants, an accounting-based role, and I'm sorry, Andrew, that probably means bankers as well. Any sort of consulting type role, middle-level management, decision-making type roles, analysis are going to be replaced by algorithms, and they will do it faster, cheaper, and better. And in fact, in some areas of breast screening and cancer detection, AI is actually proving more successful and more accurate than real-life doctors. And you'd have read recently that Air New Zealand is laying off 300 pilots. Some of those jobs may not come back for 10 years. With the advent of drone technology and technology as a whole, it's entirely likely that we will see less pilots in a cockpit. We were talking about hairdressers before. It'll be a lot, even though I love AI, it'll be a long time before I let an algorithm or a robot cut my hair. Or in my wife's case, apply makeup. I defy any robot today to crawl into my attic and fix my wiring problems. What is interesting is that those jobs on the left, the ones that our parents said, hey, get a good job, a lawyer, a doctor, an accountant, are really the jobs under threat in the future. So, and creative artists and creative artistry and creativity as a whole is an area that I think that humans can still excel in as we'll have more time. That's interesting, but that is under threat. Last year, a computer algorithm wrote its first book, and there were already paintings, quite wild and wacky paintings, almost nightmarescapes for some of them, that were completely generated randomly by algorithms. I think one of the things that we need to start thinking about is how will we fund a society where many of these roles are replaced by technology, and we don't have an opportunity to retrain, and we really, many folks may have no prospect of any income for the rest of their lives. And so I think that, again, this crisis is leading to conversations around how we will fund society going forward. There's discussions already around the universal basic income. A lot of large multinational tech companies are going to get very rich. So how would we tax those to fund our unemployed here in New Zealand? There are, one, potential for great lifestyles, but a real question is, how will we fund that? So, AI has been around for a long time, actually now, close to 100 years in terms of, well, 200 years really, since the advent of the conversations really around the first computer, the machine invented by Charles Babbage. So we see AI today as really kind of driven algorithms and programs, but there's a lot of conversation around where will this go. And the next generation, and you may have experienced this with Siri and Alexa and Cortana, is a real drive. In fact, billions of dollars being spent by Microsoft, Amazon, and Google to driving towards artificial general intelligence. And so one of the futurists, a gentleman called Ray Kurzweil, calls this point where AI algorithms become sentient, the singularity. And so we don't actually today have a measure for consciousness. We don't actually even have a measure for sentience. But most folks in the AI sector believe at some stage of the century, AI will reach a level of human level intelligence. Interesting enough, just recently, a gentleman called Nick Bostrom at Oxford University in the UK said, if we accept that AI becomes human level intelligence, what will happen is that will become exponentially more intelligent. The algorithm doesn't need to sleep, or breathe, doesn't need to be paid. It has access to unlimited amounts of data. It will learn and learn and learn and become super intelligent. And so the real challenge for society in the longer term, when a computer program or an algorithm is smarter than us, can break through any firewall, manipulate currencies, banking systems, and God forbid, launch nuclear weapons, how do we control that in the future? But in the short to medium term, there are certainly a number of benefits for AI. You know, we'll be using, and we're already using robots to explore different distant planets and moons, and certainly AI is going to enable dangerous jobs to become less dangerous. There's certainly help around the home. Certainly AI as a companion is very real, and the prevalence of robots in Japan proves that. And my wife had to visit a doctor recently, and the doctor diagnosed her over the phone. And when we all finally get back to work, you know, I bet we can't wait to get back in that commuter traffic. But with the advent of driverless cars, we better read the paper, have a coffee, not worried about stopping distance, and things will happen a lot smoother, certainly with less accidents. So what do we do about this? We can't put this genie back in the bottle. We haven't been good at that, and we haven't really had social conversations about what happens next. In fact, the only real laws around robot were written by Isaac Asimov in 70 years ago in a book called I, Robot, and he wrote the 3 laws of robotics, which are purely fictional. But I think we need to start having a social conversation around the role of AI, not only the disruption in jobs, but the theme of my book is actually is what happens when we create these human-level intelligent beings. What rights do they have? You know, we create something that has a mind as beautiful as our own, but they're they're managing a toaster, or they're an interface to a fridge that their only job is to say, "Hey, Scott, that's enough beers for the day," or "No more tubs of ice cream." So ultimately, what rights do these algorithms have? And then, how do we start putting these control mechanisms in place when AI becomes as intelligent as us and possibly more intelligent than us in the future? So hopefully we're pretty close, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. I think we've got some time for a conversation. I've got a demo, but I think I might run out of time for that. But I'm happy to share this deck with you. You can see the demo. It's work we're doing on an algorithm to help the elderly in homes. So hopefully you find that interesting. Love you to communicate with me. My email's here, and happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you, Scott. That was really thought-provoking. I'm going to hand over to Jen to moderate questions coming in.
Thanks, Scott. I'm glad that you ended on a few benefits there. If anyone's got a question, maybe you could pop it in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on that. And I think, sometimes we can get quite distraught about what might happen to our world as it changes. We've certainly had a lot of practice recently about, how we react to change. The first question for you, Scott, is what is sensory perception?
Sensory perception. I would get in respect to AI, we can mirror every sense now. So certainly vision, sound, smell is kind of difficult. We can actually generate artificial smells. I haven't seen AI in smells. Hearing's obvious. Touch. So we can replicate 4 of the 5 senses relatively easy with AI. Was that the question?
Yeah, I guess understanding what are the senses and which ones are more advanced. You talked about language, so that's interesting to hear about the smelling concept.
Yeah, I've been. I haven't really discussed it here today. But as I started writing the book, and I better hurry up and finish it because it won't be sci-fi, it'll be historical fiction. I wanted to find out whether you could program curiosity into an algorithm, only to find that Google were already doing it. And I wanted to understand, could you programmatically design intuition into a program? And I thought that maybe quantum computing, and that's another subject, might be a way to do that. And interestingly enough, your companies are already taking these neural learning networks and putting them into quantum computing computers. And I really, maybe that is the tipping point. So we're already starting to understand sentiments, curiosity, programmatically designing sentiment analysis and curiosity, and maybe in the future intuition into computer programs.
Thanks, Scott. So just to take a different path for a minute, the promise of autonomous vehicles and us floating to work safely protected by those algorithms is fantastic. What do you think happens in the meantime when we end up with a mix of autonomous vehicles and your normal driver who might not be quite as predictable? Have you seen anything on that?
Yeah, I was actually doing some work with MB and did some research. We were looking at using parts of the red zone in Christchurch for testing autonomous vehicles. The street layouts were there, it was well mapped. But actually they've been testing autonomous vehicles for the last 10 years in the US, literally racking up hundreds of millions of miles. The last 10 accidents involving an autonomous vehicle, all but one of them were human faults. So this is proven technology, and if you drive around San Francisco today, you will see cars with no one in the driver's seat.
And thinking about our natural environment, there was an article Alex noted this morning on Radio New Zealand about robotic dolphins. What are your thoughts around AI for protecting the natural environment and also things like climate change, sort of that AI for good type sector?
Well, it's really all around data. So robots are hard because you've got to build them, they've got to move. We'll see more advance in AI and the algorithms because they're scalable. They don't have to move. Those are the jobs of the thinking that is likely going to be replaced first. So it's probably around a whole lot of sensors using Internet of Things and gathering massive amounts of data and looking for insights into climate change, tidal change, environmental change, measuring that, and then maybe making more accurate predictions. I'm sure AI is used in managing climate or analysing climate change today. So, but as we just see this plethora of new different types of sensors, AI will probably learn and make more accurate predictions in the short term. Will we see robotic dolphins?
They're just not quite as aesthetically pleasing, I think, to make you go, ah. How about if you were advising someone, Scott, a young person like us today, on what sort of secondary education path to take? What would you say?
Yeah, it's math. It's all based on maths. So if AI is an area that you wanted to get into, the key programming language today is Python. It's really about mathematics. It's statistics. The hottest job in computer programming today is a data scientist, which isn't actually writing the program. It's understanding the data and the impact that has on the current world, on the economy, and on business. So data science, which is kind of a mix of maths, programming, and stats, is there'll be plenty of jobs in that area for a long time yet.
Thank you. Do you know about Emirates? Are they using social distancing? I think that app that you showed us could be fascinating, or are they just one big bubble? Do you know anything about that?
Emirates Air?
Emirates Team New Zealand.
No. Yeah, it feels like RFID is going to be a better way. We did some exploration work, which you saw, this was Arcanum. Did some exploration work around social distancing, and it's hard to invest in that using CCTV cameras. And so what Emirates are using is, I believe that there are bracelets using RFID, so if something comes within a range, they'll beep. Not particularly scalable, so it may be a combination of CCTV cameras and tags or alerts between phones in terms of censorship.